Welcome to Brandon Hall Group's HCMx Radio, the only podcast in the HCM arena that weaves current market research, HR technology, and industry leaders into each episode. Our HCMx Radio host is our Chief Operating Officer and Principal HCM Analyst, Rachel Cook.
Hi, I'm Rachel Cook, the COO and the host of Brandon Hall Group's radio podcast. I am excited to be here today with our guest, Rahul Singh. He is the director of Harbinger Group. Welcome, Rahul. How are you?
Thank you so much, Rachel, for having me today here. I'm doing good. Thank you. How are you?
Fantastic. I'm great. Thank you. And just for those that are listening in or signing in to see us, I want to provide a little bit of background about Rahul. He is a digital learning enthusiast and is very passionate about helping organizations and leaders solve challenges around learner engagement and students' outcomes through intervention of learning technologies. In his career of over 15 years in the digital learning space, he has helped a host of global organizations and educational institutions in implementing a myriad of new initiatives around their digital learning strategy. And he's, as I mentioned, the Senior Director of Harbinger Group. So, and a little bit about Harbinger, for those of you that are familiar, they are a global company providing software technology services for independent software vendors and enterprises, specializing in product engineering. Since 1990, Harbinger has developed a strong customer base worldwide. Their customers are software product companies, including high-tech startups in Silicon Valley, leading product companies in the US, and large in-house IT organizations. They are also, they build software solutions leveraging digital technologies for HR tech, work tech, health tech, and ed tech. And today, we're going to be talking about diversity, exclusivity, and inclusion. They are Harbinger Group. They've also won 7 Brandon Hall Group Excellence Awards in 2021, so congratulations. And we collaborated with them on a book, in an ebook at the end of last year, Why Modernize Learning Content, Things You Need to Know. So we talk a lot about content and how to deliver it in a modern way. And so we were chatting in preparation for our talk today a little bit about what does that mean in the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I think, you know, they're both very relevant to understanding the content and how to deliver it the best way and innovative and creative way to make it engaging and meaningful. So let's get started, Rahul. Let's talk a little bit first about what is the culture like at Harbinger, and you know, and how. Let's talk about the culture at Harbinger to start us off.
Absolutely, Rachel. And once again, thank you very much for having me today for this conversation. This is a very exciting topic, diversity, equity, and inclusivity. And talking about the culture at the organization, I think there are 2 key things that stand out regarding the culture. One is that innovation. The first one is innovation. So it runs right in the DNA of every Harbinger, every employee at Harbinger. And it is being driven by the leadership. It is being driven right from the top to bottom. And one of the reasons is that we have been successful. We have been successful in innovating stuff and delivering stuff that is relevant to our customers and can impact the business outcomes. One of the reasons behind that, or the secret sauce behind that, has been this innovation factor. And the innovation has been possible because we have implemented a culture of learning in the organization. We have encouraged people to do continuous learning, reskill, upskill themselves on, you know, the emerging trends and technologies, and allow them to innovate. So we have given them the freedom to innovate and come up with some innovative stuff. And that's where the learners have been engaged, the employees have been engaged with the organization's learning culture, and that's where they have been able to innovate. So that's part 1 of the story, that's innovation. The second part is, and I'm very proud to speak about this, is the gender equality that we have at our organization. Uh, I do not have the exact numbers, but little around about 30 plus of our leadership positions are occupied by women. And in total at the organization, around about 60% of our employees are female and 40% of our employees are male. And this is not by chance, this is by choice. There has been a conscious effort over a period of years to establish this equality, equity in
Mhm.
the system. So just to summarize, these are the two things. First is the innovation and then is the equity part in our employee culture.
So this kind of segues into my next question is how diversity and inclusivity are becoming an integral part of your systems. How you mentioned it wasn't by chance. So how did you um, um, how did you foster that opportunity or that structure?
Right. That's an interesting case, and so it basically started at there were multiple pronged strategy to get that done. First one was at a hiring level. So when we were hiring, we ensured that we go out and hire diverse people. Uh, there's a saying that goes that if every hiring manager hires someone like himself or herself, uh, we'll reach to a point where in there stereotyped kind of uh,
Mhm.
people in the organization. So it was important for us to educate, coach, and teach the hiring managers that it's okay to hire people who are different than you. And so the hiring process was worked out. That's part one. And the second one was in terms of the meritocracy. So it was not about any particular unconscious bias that led to people growing up in the organization, but it was about who is able to perform, who's able to innovate. And I'll tie this back again to the innovation part. People who were able to innovate, do beyond their daily stuff, got a chance, got an opportunity to grow in the organization. And that's where we, you know, consistently fostered this culture of meritocracy and innovation. And, that's how it went about.
Okay. That makes sense. And, I've heard from other leaders too, when they start kind of looking at themselves and understanding, others and how diversity really enriches their team and their decisions. Because if you do choose everyone like you, or that looks like you, or that maybe went to the same college as you are really not getting a diverse perspective. And we need diverse perspectives because our world is diverse, our communities are diverse, our schools are diverse for the most part. There may be segments that aren't, but especially as you are in larger cities, it's very diverse and really, and the data shows how important. My next question to you, before I give you the answer, why is it imperative to have a diverse and inclusive design for learner engagement?
Right. So there has been enough that has been talked about diversity, equity, inclusivity in the recent past. And there's a report from McKinsey. You know, I'll just quote that report here.
Great
There's
company.
they have said that organizations who are doing better in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusivity, or who have a diverse and inclusive leadership,
Mm-hmm.
they are outperforming their peers by 30%. And that's a huge number to look at it. Just
Sure.
because you have a diverse leadership, you're able to outperform your peers in the sense your competitors by 30%. And I think the primary reason for having a diverse and inclusive working culture in the organization is you need performance, you need productivity, and you need financial outcomes. If you want to enable the learners to perform or your employees to perform, you want them to stay engaged to the learning. You want them to be able to comprehend the learning that you are providing to them and be able to apply that knowledge on work.
Mm-hmm.
Then it's about productivity. I mean, there are enough research that says that happier an employee, the more productive they are. And in the current context of things, if we give our learners opportunity to learn, continuous learning, and that too with a design style which covers the diversity, equity, and inclusivity part. The learner is supposed to stay more engaged, which means they would be more productive, more
Mm-hmm.
happier about what they're doing in terms of not just doing a transactional job, but making a difference to what they're doing and feeling good about the work. And at the end of it, the financial outcomes. If all this impacts the bottom line, we know how it works. So that's why it's imperative. And just to summarize, it's performance, productivity, and financial outcomes.
Sure, and our research also shows that when we take a look at high-performing organizations, we are able to then kind of link that to the types of culture that they have, where they are more inclusive, more collaborative, and also how they're supported by opportunities and the development and engagement, and then that you also see how that links to production and performance. And so it certainly, there's a lot of data there that shows how important this is. And where we see companies that are low performing, they have cultures that are not they're being more competitive cultures where they don't have not that competition is bad. You have to have a healthy competition. However, you really need to have a culture that embraces innovation and diversity, and then not just embrace it, but has action and steps in place. And my next question to you is, what does this look? What is this initiative, the DE&I initiative, look like, and how do you approach it?
Right. I think in the context of learning and development, one of the key things is when we are approaching this is we need to ensure that we can create an awareness regarding unconscious bias.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can ask me a counter question and say that unconscious bias, how is it related to the learning design? Now, let's take a scenario wherein an instructional designer is creating a scene within a learning course, within a digital learning course. And let's say that, they have like 4 odd people or 5 odd people sitting in a conference room and they're having a conversation. So let's say it's a scenario-based e-learning that is being created. So there are a lot of opportunities for us to make that screen inclusive. For example, we need to have gender equality there. We need to have people of different ages there, gender, ethnic, all those kind of things. And a lot of that is being done by the designers. Now, one thing that struck to me is in the current context of things, when there is hybrid working model, not necessarily everyone in that meeting is going to be present in that conference room. There's going to be someone who is attending it through a Zoom or a GoToMeeting. So we need to bring that person in the design. So make it inclusive, because even at this current stage, there are folks who are going to office and there are some employees who are still working from home for some or the other reason. We need to ensure that we make them feel included, because diversity is like being invited to the party, so you're part of the organization. Inclusivity is you're invited to dance. So that's one step further. So when it comes to design, we have to think beyond the traditional stuff that we had. So it's not about only gender, color, ethnicity, but it's the holistic design has to be inclusive. I'll just give you one other example around the unconscious bias, because this is something which is very important. For example, sometime back, one of our learning designers was creating a course for a big pharma company, and the topic was around respectful workplace, I guess. And the situation was that there is this one individual who's at a leadership role, who's having a conversation with another individual who's from the LGBTQ community. Okay. Now, the scenario is such, but we don't have to do anything differently to create that character. We just have to create two normal characters like they would look in normal life. One is the person who's in the leadership role, the other one who's from the LGBT community. Because the designer was struggling and saying that how do I ensure that this person resembles the LGBT community? But the conclusion that we made was we don't have to do that. That's an unconscious bias that we have. Right. So some of these are the things I would say the main focus in the design spec of things should be creating awareness about unconscious bias and not, bringing it into the play of things.
That's a good point, because sometimes if you point it out too much, or if you emphasize it too much, it's almost counterproductive. And so it's having that right balance.
Right, absolutely.
And then what is your, we talk a lot about equity, and equity, from your point of view, how do you define equity in your DE&I programs?
Right. No, thank you very much for asking this question. This is very interesting, and this is, I guess, the latest entrant. Earlier it was just DE&I, then it became DE&I. So equity, and I think
DE&I and B, belonging.
Oh, right, absolutely, you are correct. So it keeps evolving, and actually
Yeah.
the pandemic triggered a little bit of need of the equity. It was there before the pandemic as well, and I'll give you some examples as to why I'm saying that. I think, in my opinion, there are four key things that mattered the most for the equity part. When everything started happening remote, we realized that even the most advanced of the countries do not have internet neutrality. I was surprised to see reports that some of even the advanced countries were not able to provide this. So internet neutrality in terms of hybrid working, remote working, hybrid office environments, that's one important part. Accessibility has been there for quite some time.
Yeah.
Earlier it was Section 508, especially in US it was called Section 508, then it became VCAG 2.0, VCAG 2.1, A standards, VCAG 2.1 AA standards. But lately, I think everyone would agree to this fact that in the last 3-4 years, there has been a big push on making everything accessible. And that includes the learning and development part as well. So there's a lot of good work happening there. So that's great news. Sociological attributes. That's one thing that the designers should take care of when they're designing the learning codes. When we say equity, we need to consider a variety of sociological attributes in it, unless and until it's an exceptional case, and there could be some. And then there has to be a nice balance between synchronous and asynchronous learning if we have to bring in equity into the learning. It cannot be heavily loaded towards one side of delivery. So I would say that these are the four key things which drive the equity part: internet neutrality, accessibility, sociological attributes, and a balance between synchronous and asynchronous learning.
And how do you ensure that some of the components are being considered when you mention there's 4 dimensions in what it means to have, equity? How do you ensure, accessibility and, connection? How do you ensure that there is equity?
Right, absolutely.
That's a tough one.
Right. So it actually starts at the design level. So when when you sit on the table and you're planning to design for the e-learning course, that's where you really have to start about thinking about bringing in the equity. And I would say it would begin with having a discussion with the stakeholders as to, based on the business outcomes that you're trying to achieve from this learning program, how much of this should be self-paced, how much of this should be instructor-driven or virtual classroom-driven. So that kind of discussion. So the balance between synchronous and asynchronous, and that needs to happen in collaboration with the stakeholders, with the project sponsors, because they will be able to give us a good idea in terms of what exactly do they want, and then we can give our recommendations. And then when we get down to the design side of it, then we come into, then we bring this accessibility into picture. We don't have to think after we have developed the e-learning program or the learning material. While we are in the process, that's the best step, that's the best place to include the accessibility features, the VCAG 2.1 features into the e-learning courses. And it's a huge list. I mean, every learning designer knows that, it's a vast list. We don't have to cover everything in the world. I think what we have been practicing is just try and understand who your audience is, prioritize. So are you going to have, are you in, for example, if I'm working for a heavy engineering or manufacturing industry, so there is a very little possibility, and this we can confirm from the stakeholders, there is a very little possibility that we would have people with visual disabilities. We might have people with auditory disabilities. So the idea is prioritize your audience as to for what industry domain you're working, then what kind of audience with special needs would you end up with, and then you prioritize based on that audience, then you prioritize what all features do you want to implement. So that can make it a balanced part. So instead of doing the entire stuff. And of course, the sociological attributes, you'll be surprised to know that some of the leading stock images websites are still not up there when it comes to having an inclusive and diverse
They really
portfolio of
are.
people.
It's really hard. I mean, we've even, just kind of fast forwarding and looking at images, and there's some, but there's not. And you always want something new and fresh and innovative. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Absolutely. You rightly said. So anyone from that particular industry listening to us, I think there is some opportunity for us to improve that, and that's going to help the instructional designers or the designers to create a more inclusive. The images is just one example. There are multiple other such things, and some of the examples we spoke about. And then the last one is internet neutrality. There are multiple ways to handle this. And one of the things that we have at Harbinger is, and we did this like probably quite some time back, maybe around a decade back, we developed this offline player solution. It's called the OLP. What it basically does is to consume self-paced learning, to consume digital learning, you don't have to have access to the internet throughout the learning journey. You just need internet connection at 2 points. Point number one is when you are assigned that self-paced learning. So you need internet connection so that you can download it on your systems. And once you have it locally on your systems, you can consume the e-learning. And then once you are back with internet connection, you can go back and sync your e-learning material, and it will update all the progress and tracking that has been done.
Oh,
and
nice.
It's secure. Yeah.
Right. Kind of like, if you think about it, but more robust than, let's say, Dropbox, right? You need to connect to it at the very beginning to get your information, but then it's hosted on your platform.
That's correct.
So it's really easy.
Yes, that's correct. That's one of the possible ways of limiting the internet neutrality stuff.
The stop and go and frustration of the internet. And so what are other some of best practices for design? We talked a lot, and as we're wrapping up here, what are some of your takeaways or recommendations for designing a diverse and inclusive learning modality that can be implemented in a remote learning solution?
Right. Yep. So yeah, absolutely. We spoke about a lot of things. I would say that, now let me, share a few things which we should not do based on the experience that we have. Is my request to all the
helpful.
right. So my request to the designers is do not do it only to look good. Just for, for example, there's this screen that I'm working on in an e-learning course, and I need to look more diverse and inclusive, and I'm trying to make it more crowded by adding more characters. No, if just keep it simple as possible. Do not overdo it. Do not stereotype. That's very important. We spoke about the LGBTQ example,
Mhm.
so that's very important. Do not stereotype. Focus on the learner. I think it's been said right from the early days of e-learning is that you need to know your learner, who your learner is. For example, today it's not just about the learning style of a learner, but then there's so many other things. For example, what do you if you have a multi-generational workforce as your target audience? You have these millennials, Gen Zs, the baby boomers, all kind of peoples. How are you going to create an inclusive learning solution for them? So
Mhm.
think through that. That's very important, because you cannot create for an organization, you cannot create a separate e-learning course for everyone who's a Gen Z and a separate course for everyone who's a baby boomer. So as learning designers, we need to learn those things, and there's no secret sauce to it, trust me. It's
Right.
about doing a prototype, running it, taking the learner feedback, implementing that feedback, and then developing the actual e-learning course. And the last one is the community as a stakeholder. For example, we are saying focus on the learner, but we have to draw one more circle around the learner is, and we also have to bring in the community into picture, because these learners, if we want to keep them engaged in this remote learning scenarios and solutions, we have to ensure that we display their community as well. Uh, it cannot be just like a an image or a background with an office or an office building. It doesn't talks about the community. You have to go outside the office and four walls of the office and bring in the community and the other aspects of it. So bringing in community as a stakeholder, I think that's very important. uh, it might not be that too much relevant in the corporate learning space, but in the education space, in the continuing education space, in my opinion, it's getting very important.
Okay. Interesting. Those are some really good tips. And my last question is around the role of technology or accessible technology in inclusive education. We talked a lot about, how important exclusivity is and technology. I think kind of what light do you want to shed on that as we wrap up for today?
Right. Thank you. And in terms of the role of technology for accessible education is one important aspect is, for example, if you want to get the accessible e-learning courses developed for your learners, you also need to provide them the right set of solutions so that they can utilize those features. For example, you can only experience the accessibility features of an e-learning course if you're using a reader, something like a JAWS reader or an NVIDIA reader.
Mhm.
So we need to ensure that the learners have access to that particular application or software or hardware. It's as simple as that. You can go out and build a very cool virtual reality simulation for your employees, but then do you expect your employees to go and get an Oculus headset and experience that VR? Or as an organization, would you provide them with that solution so that the technology can be made accessible? So if you're designing for something, think the entire nine yards, try to make it as much inclusive as possible.
That's great advice. Thank you for sharing your expertise and really offering some really good tips too and considerations for DE&I and technology and innovation and engagement. I hope everyone enjoyed our discussion today as much as I did. And thank you, Rahul, for your joining us, and I hope you have a lovely evening. Here's another example of, we're in 2 different locations, 2 different parts of the world coming together on a topic that's really important. So it's really great to have this opportunity to do so. Have a nice evening, and thank you everyone for listening in and joining us. Take care.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you.